A new poll released from Quinnipiac University shows, yet again, that Bernie Sanders is our best chance against the Republicans. So when you put Bernie Sanders against Donald Trump, Bernie leads 49 to 41%. That's 8 points. Now when you put Bernie Sanders against Marco Rubio, Bernie leads by 1 point, 44 to 43%. When you put Bernie Sanders against Ted Cruz, he leads 49 to 39%, a 10-point lead. When you put Sanders against Carson, Bernie Sanders wins 47 to 41%. That is a 6-point lead. Now, when you contrast that with Hillary Clinton's numbers, you'll see that when you put Hillary Clinton against Marco Rubio, she wins 45 to 44%. So that's a 1-point lead. That's the same as Bernie Sanders, but in a lot of cases, she doesn't do as well as Bernie Sanders against the Republicans. So case in point, Clinton versus Trump. She wins 47 to 41%. That's a 6-point lead. Bernie Sanders has an 8-point lead over Trump. When you put Hillary Clinton against Ted Cruz, she wins 47 to 42. So she has a 5-point lead over Ted Cruz. Bernie Sanders has a 10-point lead over him. When you put Hillary Clinton against Ben Carson, she leads 46 to 43%. That's a 3-point lead. Now remember that Bernie Sanders leads Carson by 6 points. So Bernie Sanders does just as well, if not better, than Hillary Clinton against the Republicans. Now, time and again, as I've said, the polls have shown this. So this is better than the last poll, actually. So the last poll that I talked about, it showed that Bernie Sanders actually outperformed Clinton on hypothetical matchups, but the problem was that he was still getting beat by Republicans. Both Hillary and Bernie Sanders were not faring too well against them. Well, thankfully, polls are reflecting rationale. So voters are now voting in favor of Democrats as opposed to Republicans, because even though I disagree with Hillary Clinton on a number of issues, I would far rather support her than any Republican. So both her and Bernie should be destroying Republicans. And finally, polls are reflecting that. So the question now is why Bernie Sanders does better than Hillary Clinton when it comes to hypothetical matchups. Well, the reason is because he actually captures a lot of independent and Republican voters. People don't want to believe this, but there is a substantial portion of Republicans that are voting for Bernie Sanders or want to vote for Bernie Sanders just based on his campaign finance reform platform, because he's against crony capitalism, because he's against corruption and money in politics. Well, this excites a lot of Republicans who are also in favor of that. So they're willing to cut across party lines to vote for Bernie Sanders here. Now, another point that should be made is if you control for generation, that is, if you just look at millennial voters, well, they are far more inclined to support Bernie Sanders. So he outperforms Clinton in hypothetical matchups because he excites them, thus making it more likely they'll vote. That's just obvious. Now, the interesting part of this poll is that it shows Hillary Clinton, while still about 27 points ahead of Bernie Sanders nationally, well, she has a negative favorability rating, and furthermore, Bernie Sanders has the highest honesty rating among all the candidates. So this is really great news. It shows that Bernie Sanders, even though he's not necessarily leading in any polls nationally, people like him. So now the sample size was 1,453 registered voters. That's 672 Republicans, 573 Democrats. Kind of a small sample size for Democrats, but I mean, it's larger than a lot of them that are being released. Some of them have as low as like 250, and I think that's just not enough to have any sort of general applicability or implications nationally. Now, this was conducted by both landlines and cell phones, so this is great. So it doesn't just sway the results towards older voters who are only inclined to use landlines. Now, the margin of error is plus or minus 2.6 percentage points. So this seems like a fairly reliable poll. And so I like it. It says what Bernie Sanders supporters have been yelling about from the beginning. He's nationally electable, because I know a ton of people who support Hillary Clinton, not because they agree with her more, but because they think that she has a better chance of winning in a national election than Bernie Sanders, because he's not as charismatic as her. He is not as assertive as her. But that's not true. People like Bernie Sanders, and our political environment is conducive to a candidate who is really unorthodox, because we're all tired of establishment candidates. Hence the reason why Donald Trump, hence the reason why Ben Carson and Bernie Sanders are doing so well on both sides. So, great poll. I was really excited to hear about this.